And we are now recording. So again, welcome everyone to November's HR Lunch and Learn. Today we have a really exciting topic. We have Tori and Justine from the Caped Canines Assistance Academy to talk a little bit about how canines can be of assistance to us in certain situations. So Tori and Justine, thanks for being here, and take it away.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited. We know Taylor, she's a former client of mine, and then Justine's in our group classes. So we've known her for years. And when she proposed us coming to chat with you guys, we were very excited for the opportunity. So today we are going to talk to you about working canines. We were told to keep this under an hour, and we will do our best for that. We can talk about this all day long. So working canines is really a broad scope. So we narrowed it down a little bit more into your field. So we will talk a little bit more specifically about the working canines that impact you directly. So a little bit about us. As he said, my name is Tori Tilley. I am serving as the Executive Director of Caped Canines Assistance Academy. I am a co-founder and the former board president. Before we started this 501c3, I was a pet dog trainer solely. I focused primarily on basic and advanced obedience and behavior modification. So if you know any dogs that would maybe lunge or pull on leash or even had aggression, that was really my specialty for the past decade. Justine and I have known and worked together for about 9 years now, 8 or 9. So we got together, and this has always been a dream of ours. And I'll talk about Caped Canines after I give Justine a chance to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Justine Oakwood. I'm a graduate of National Canine School for Dog Trainers like Tori Tilley. I've been training professionally for 16 years now. While I do some behavior mod and lots of basic obedience, my kind of passion and niche is puppy development. So I developed a course called Puppy Prep School, where I take puppies for owners directly from breeders and rescue and handle the difficult task of socializing, great training, laying a foundation of really excellent manners, and helping set a dog up to navigate their world with confidence and stability. So that program is kind of the foundation for our entire service dog training program that Tori will talk about.
Yeah, and I see a few of our board members have also joined the meeting. I think our board president, Mindy, is in here, as well as our secretary, Hannah. I may have missed some others as they popped on. So if you see people who don't look familiar, they're with us. They wanted to learn with you guys today on their lunch break as well. So a little bit about Caped Canines. I mentioned earlier, we are a 501c3. We were founded at the end of 2021. Our mission and vision statement are listed there, but I really wanted to focus on what makes us different from other service dog nonprofits that you may be familiar with or have seen on TV. And we really have a focus specifically on individuals who could potentially self-train a service dog, but they don't have the knowledge that they need in order to do it successfully. So with our professional guidance, we will help them to self-train. And that starts with Justine's Puppy Prep School system so that we can build the most perfect foundation for a puppy possible, which reduces the washout rate rather than having a pup that maybe gets off to a rough start, doesn't get the time and work that it needs in order to be the best puppy possible and future dog possible. It's coming straight to a trainer who knows the ins and outs of raising a puppy to be the most robust and well-balanced dog possible, as well as laying the groundwork for some of the tasks that it may be asked to do in the future. So that's our focus. And we created a dual system where the dogs are living part-time with us and part-time with their owner handler, which also severely decreases the cost to train a service dog. Some of you may know the average cost is between $25,000 and $75,000, depending on the amount of tasks and the intensity of the tasks that the dog's being trained to do, as well as the time that it takes to train the dog, because they're transferring their skills as they go into their handler's home. So that's a little bit about our company and why we are here talking about working dogs today. Our presentation is going to focus, as we've mentioned, on working dogs, but most specifically on therapy dogs, emotional support dogs, service dogs, and that niche of psychiatric service dogs. And we will save time for question and answers, but if you guys want to drop questions in the chat as we go, you're more than welcome to. And if we're not planning on hitting it in our presentation, we can stop and talk about it. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Justine to introduce working dogs.
So working dogs is a really broad category that we use to describe any dog that performs practical tasks for humans. So I'm going to give you a quick breakdown of the different types of working dogs. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's pretty comprehensive. So service dogs are those that help a human mitigate an individual disability. So they have public access rights. They do task work specifically. Guide dogs are just a subset of service dogs. They help people with visual impairments navigate their world by guiding them physically. Therapy dogs are dogs that go into third-party facilities and help people other than their handler feel happy and emotionally well. They do have very specific training, but are extremely different than service dogs, which we'll get into a little bit in a minute. Facility dogs are a subset of therapy dogs, specifically ones that go to the same facility over and over and over again, and sometimes have service tasks trained into them. However, they qualify as therapy dogs because they're doing that task work for other people, not one individual person. So facility dogs do not have full public access rights, just like a therapy dog doesn't. Search and rescue dogs are those that go out and find people. That may be after a natural disaster, a child who's gotten lost in the woods, anything like that. Typically part of private organizations or volunteer groups that train and practice together and then get called in to help. Detection dogs are dogs that use their nose to find things. So technically search and rescue dogs are part of detection dogs, but most typically when we're talking detection dogs, we're talking about narcotics detection, sometimes bed bugs. They even started training dogs to do COVID-19 detection. So any dog that can use their nose to find something, detection dog. Police dogs are those that you see out and about on patrol in police cars. They do things like suspect apprehension, suspect holds, narcotics detection, very broad range of things that police dogs can do. They typically only work for one police officer though. Military dogs do very similar tasks to police dogs. However, they tend to work in slightly higher adrenalized environments with a little bit more intensity, and do frequently work for multiple handlers. Guard dogs work independently from humans to protect a space during hours when humans wouldn't normally be present. So that is our typical junkyard guard dog, pawn shop guard dog, and potentially impound lots, things like that. Livestock guardians live outside with a flock of animals or a herd of animals at all times. They work very independently from humans to help protect those animals from predation. Herding dogs, on the other end of the spectrum, work very closely with humans to go help farmers round up livestock, bring them together, and hold them in a tight group so that the farmer can either move them from point A to point B or perform medical procedures, herd checks, things like that. Demonstration dogs are dogs that Tori and I use in our everyday job to help our clients understand what skills we're talking about when we're talking about things like sit, down, stay, how those should function, and to give our clients an opportunity to practice those skills on a dog that already understands what they're doing so they can fill in their half of the equation before we add their completely untrained dog into it.
Good job.
Thanks. Therapy dogs. So a little more detail on therapy dogs. They are, like I said, a group of dogs that are specifically trained to go and provide emotional support to other humans besides their handler. They have very, very specific things that they're trained to do, but not in the same ways that service dogs are. So one of the tenets of therapy dogs is that there are governing bodies like Pet Partners, Delta Society, Therapy Dogs International, just to name a few. Those individual organizations set their own guidelines for what skills a dog needs to have in place before they get tested and then certified as a team to go into specific places that have requested visitation. So places that request visitation might be a hospital, nursing home, hospice, libraries. But the main important thing to remember is that the facility has to request visitation from the overarching therapy organization, and that therapy organization then signs an agreement with the facility stating that their dogs are safe to come in, have been tested, certified to be so, and are covered by insurance. So therapy dogs mandatorily have to have second or third party separate insurance that covers if anything, while unlikely, should happen and cause injury to a person.
Okay. Therapy dogs are definitely a sector of working dog that you guys probably have experience with. Emotional support animals may also fall into that category. So we are going to specifically talk about emotional support dogs, but emotional support animals are any domesticated animal that assists humans through mental and emotional distress and or psychiatric conditions. So they do mean any domesticated animal in this. It could be a ferret, a peacock, a goat. It literally is limitless. If the animal is domesticated, it could theoretically be an emotional support animal. And again, we're going to focus on dogs because that is our safe space. But you may get requests for emotional support animals that fall outside of the realm of dog. What makes it an emotional support animal and not a pet is a letter provided by the individual's mental health care provider. So this can be a therapist, counselor, social worker, psychiatrist, psychologist. It could even theoretically be a general practitioner if they have a knowledge base about that person's mental disorders. What this letter needs to have in it is very specific. So it does need to be on professional letterhead. It needs to list the healthcare provider's full name, first and last name, as well as their license number. It needs to be signed and dated. In the body of the text, it needs to include the patient's full name, as well as that they believe an emotional support animal would be beneficial to them. The letter does not need to include any of their disorders or specifics about how they think an emotional support animal would help them. So that letter is really critical, and it's one of the ways that we're able to identify whether or not an ESA is a fraud or if it is an actual ESA. And we will touch on some of the online stuff that's happening in a second. So ESAs do get some housing allowances protected under federal law. The Fair Housing Act does apply to emotional support animals. So that means that if a housing unit, let's say an apartment complex, has a no pet policy, or even if it has breed or size restrictions, those do not apply to an emotional support animal as long as that letter is 100% legit. There are a couple other reasons that they may be exempt from having to allow an ESA, but for the vast majority of cases, no pet policies do not apply. As far as training and identification requirements goes, Justin and I will argue probably it's the hill that we would probably die on, that all animals, all pets should be well trained, especially if they're working in any type of capacity. So emotional support animals do primarily work in the home. They don't have any. All of our dogs bring us emotional support. Those of you who have dogs or even cats, I'm not a cat person, but I hear that they're good. Argue that emotional support or that our pets are really great for us, that they bring us companionship and joy, and they're part of the family, whether or not they've had training. But that letter is the identifier for if it is an emotional support animal or not. There is no vest, collar, leash, shirt, tag, ID card, anything else that an ESA would need other than that letter. Okay, that's why it's different from us and our household pets. What this has led to is widespread fraud that we have seen making changes in our federal laws. So because it is so easy for people to access these letters, there have been hundreds of websites that have popped up in the past decade where you hop on, you answer a couple of questions. It's fairly easy to manipulate your answers to those questions. And they'll pop up and say a counselor has a letter for you, and you pay $100, you get your letter, you get a little ID card in the mail, and voila, you have an ESA. And so because of this, we have seen the Air Carriers Access Act, or ACAA, change. It was proposed in December of 2020, and they actually changed it in January of 2021. So it was a very fast moving change that stopped individuals from being able to bring their emotional support animals into the cabin of airplanes, and they now have to ride in the cargo instead. So because of this fraud of people claiming that they had an ESA when it was just a pet that they wanted to have with them in their home or on their airplane with them, we're seeing ramifications. And I believe that that will continue for multiple reasons. We'll talk about psychiatric service dogs in a minute, but I also believe as people continue to abuse this system, that it's going to continue to create more and more hurdles for those who actually need ESAs, as well as more law changes to block people who are abusing the system. And on to service dogs. So service dogs is my and Justine's bread and butter. This is really where we like to focus our attention. Service dogs, as she mentioned, perform tasks that alleviate their owner's disability. So it is a dog trained for an individual, not for multiple people, and they must do a task that the human cannot do for themselves. They have the most legal protections of any dog. So they're protected by the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, FHA, and the ACAA, the Air Carriers Access Act. So they have 3 different federal laws that protect them. No pets policies do not apply to service dogs. We'll again talk about those exemptions in a second. But as far as where a service dog can go, the answer is anywhere that their handler can go. Think of them as a piece of medical equipment. If their handler came into a facility in a wheelchair, you wouldn't tell them that wheelchair is unwelcome. It's a piece of medical equipment that they need. And that is the same train of thought that you should have when considering service dogs. It is a piece of medical equipment that allows them to live their lives. And so they cannot be denied access because of that service dog. Training for a service dog is the most stringent, besides maybe military and police canines. Training for service dogs should always have basic and advanced obedience, both on and off leash. And then, of course, they have to be trained to perform those tasks. We usually see service dogs performing 2 to 3 tasks, but I've seen service dogs trained on up to 6. Usually if an individual needs that many tasks, or if they need a dog to perform these tasks for unlimited amounts of hours, 24 hours a day, they may have multiple service dogs so that they can be trained on separate tasks, or some dogs can work on shifts. You work the night shift, you work the day shift, or you went out with me yesterday, you're going to go out with me today, so they can rest. But for the most part, we'll see service dogs are trained on an average of 2 to 3 tasks for their humans. They only need to be trained on 1 task, and we will get into what those look like as well. It is really important to stress that there is no state, federal, local, city certification, licensing, any type of requirement for a service dog. There are public access tests that handlers, teams, and trainers can take to see if that service dog is ready and prepared to be out in public to perform its duties. Third-party organizations usually will run these, like the International Association of Canine Professionals. Some will even use the AKC's Canine Good Citizen test as a benchmark. It really depends on the team and what they would like to do before prepping, but it's not a requirement at all for a service dog to do a public access test before going out and about. Some states, including Kentucky, Ohio, and Indiana, allow for service dogs in training to be out in public with their trainers. And so in the case of a service dog that is being self-trained by its human, by its future handler, that is their trainer. So they are able to be out in public, even when they're under that training category, meaning they don't completely have a task mastered yet. So again, there is no certification at any level at all. There is no registry, no licensing at all for service dogs. So people often have this, like, it's misinformation really. They have this preconceived notion that a service dog has to have an ID, it has to wear a vest, it has to be out in public under these very specific parameters, and that's just not true. Service dogs are supposed to be equalizers. They're supposed to make the lives of the disabled handler easier. And so the more barriers that we put into place, the less likely that is. And that includes requiring for them to pay to get certified or to go and take tests with their dogs. So identification requirements are also non-existent. It is very common that you will see a service dog wearing a vest, and handlers do this for a couple of reasons. One that most people think of is that their dog has been trained when the vest is on, you're working, when the vest is off, you're a pet. And for some dogs that is true and that works. And for other dogs, regardless of whether the vest is on or not, they're working. The second reason that we primarily see humans putting vests on service dogs is for public awareness. And so depending on the task that the dog is performing, taking their attention away by saying, hey doggy, or tapping their butt or making kissy noises at them could be life-altering to the person who is utilizing that service dog. And so we see dogs wearing vests that may say things like, working dog, do not pet, do not distract, do not approach. Unfortunately, the general public doesn't always read or listen, but the goal of those vests is to help the handler have more of a clear focus from their dog by alerting the public that this is not a pet, it is not some a dog that they can just walk up to and interact with. It is working and it is doing its job. A third thing to note about identification requirements and training is that service dogs are also not required to be leashed if the task that they're performing would be impacted by them having a leash. So that is another thing to note. If you've ever seen an off-leash service dog and thought, I don't think that's right. If the task they're performing is going to be hindered by the leash, it does not need to be on them. And then let me cover exemptions really quickly. So for emotional support animals and for service dogs who are both protected under the FHA, for either one of them, and I would argue for therapy dogs as well, any sign of aggression, they're going to get the boot for it. So an emotional support animal can be removed from its housing. And a service dog could even be removed from its housing if it's under a no pets policy, if it shows any aggression, or if it's being a nuisance to neighbors. We just did a presentation on Friday for the Ohio Valley chapter of individuals who are condo owners and managers. And so we really focused on ESAs and service dogs and their housing allowances. So I just wanted to stress that. I can get into the specifics of exemptions for either if you guys have questions about those, but that's a whole topic that could probably take 20 additional minutes. I just wanted to note that there are times that a service dog can be asked to leave a public space as well as the home that it lives in. So any signs of aggression or being a nuisance of any kind, a service dog can be asked to leave a space. Otherwise, it is allowed to be in the same space that its handler is in and treated as medical equipment.
So a quick summary of the differences between all of these, just so we have them all ironed out. Service dogs are the only dogs covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. They're the only ones with public access rights. They're specifically trained for task work for a single individual. They are yes, so they are absolutely the only ones that are allowed public access. Therapy dogs are dogs that go out in public and provide services to other people besides their handlers. They do not have public access to restaurants or anywhere that is not a specifically dog-friendly space. Emotional support animals provide comfort simply by their presence with no additional task work for an individual in their home without any public access rights whatsoever. No pets policies, though, do apply or do get disregarded in the case of service dogs and emotional support dogs. So no pets policies, not applicable to those. Therapy dogs, though, do not get exempt from those no pet policies. So sorry, guys, therapy dogs have to live legally everywhere. Absolutely, all of these dogs should be super well trained. There's no excuse, as far as Tori and I are concerned, for an out of control dog, especially not one that we're going to call a working dog. And that includes ESAs. Like, they shouldn't be running around like crazy pantses as soon as they get outside of their house. Service dogs are now the only dogs covered under the Air Carriers Access Act. Emotional support animals used to be allowed on planes, not anymore. And all three of these dogs, if you see them being aggressive, they are either fraudulent or having the worst day of their lives and might need to reconsider their job. So what happens if you're out in public or you're doing your job somewhere and you see someone with a service dog, but you are not sure whether or not that is a service dog or whether or not it's a real service dog? So there are only two legal questions that proprietors can ask a service dog team. The first one is this a service animal required because of a disability? The only correct answer to that is yes. If they say no, then you can ask them to leave immediately, because as we went over, no animal besides a service dog has public access rights. So if they do say yes and you're still not sure, you can follow up with, what work or tasks has this dog been trained to perform? Typical answers to this are going to be medical alert, mobility, psychiatric service, deep pressure therapy, or medical detection. So those are really broad sweeping categories. It's up to the individual whether or not they want to get into more detail on those tasks, but those are all perfectly valid answers to that second question. They don't need to list off their entire task list to you. It should be a pretty brief answer. And that's specifically so that we aren't overburdening our legitimate service dog teams when they're out in public, because they probably get asked those questions multiple times per day. So what you cannot ask is to see any documentation, certification, registration, or licensure, because as we went over, there is no such thing. So if you ask someone, is this a legit service dog team, and they hand you a certification card without answering those questions as, yes, I have a disability that this dog mitigates for me, or here are some tasks, or here are the type of work that my dog does for me, they may or may not be a legitimate team, but you are not allowed to ask for that licensure, because real service dog teams probably don't have those because they're not required. So you also cannot ask for a demonstration of tasks. It's an undue burden on the handler to make their dog perform monkey drills for you just to prove that they're a legitimate tasking team. You also are not allowed to inquire about the nature of the person's disability in any way, shape, or form. If in answering that second question, they wish to say something along the lines of, this is a diabetic alert dog, thus volunteering some information about the nature of their disability, that's completely up to them, but you're not allowed to probe for those answers.
Okay, so we wanted to focus a little bit more on psychiatric service dogs. We felt that was most applicable of the service dogs to your careers and what you do on a day-to-day basis. So I had mentioned that one of the reasons that I thought more changes may happen in the realm of emotional support animals was because of psychiatric service dogs. So we have seen a huge surplus of psychiatric service dogs in the past probably 3 years, really, since COVID-19. And we're seeing that the laws are starting to change and modify to include psychiatric service dogs. So the difference between an ESA and a psychiatric service dog is that a psychiatric service dog performs tasks. So it falls under that service dog category because it does actual things that help to mitigate that person's mental disability. So this is a list of some of the most common disorders that we would see a psychiatric service dog trained for. So PTSD, depression, anxiety, OCD, ADHD, bipolar disorders, social phobias, schizophrenia, agoraphobia, claustrophobia, panic disorders, and autism all fall under the spectrum of a psychiatric service dog. So these are all, if you have patients that you're working with, these are all reasons that someone may consider having a psychiatric service dog and some of the tasks that they may be trained to do. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some of the ideas of the tasks that they may be trained to do. Deep pressure therapy would be one. Medication reminders would be another. Retrieval, this could be of dropped items or even of medication bags. Balance assistance, or what we call mobility. Alerting, this could be alerting to a lot of things. We would primarily teach alerting to changes of them, but it could be alerting to things in their environment as well. Tactile stimulation. Interruption, and what we mean by this is interruption of their own behaviors. So like picking, or if they're tossing their foot, I don't know what that's called, if bouncing their foot, whatever that's called. So interrupting any behaviors that could even be causing self-harm. Waking them up from nightmares. I have a dog that I trained, gosh, it's been 4 or 5 years ago now. He lives in California with his handler now, and he was specifically trained to wake up his handler when she has night terrors. So that is, I think, a pretty cool task. It doesn't mean that he can't sleep or that he's always, working when she's napping. But if he wakes up because of her night terrors, then he wakes her up. It's really cool. Guiding them. So if we have maybe a person with anxiety or claustrophobia, they may have a dog that guides them to a safe space away from a crowd or into a quiet room, as well as blocking. So keeping a perimeter around their person so that they have however much space they need to feel comfortable. And that's a task that may require the dog to be off leash.
So there are some very careful considerations when thinking about placing a psychiatric service dog or recommending a psychiatric service dog, because it is a fairly niche sector of the service dog world. First and foremost is hospitalizations. This is not unique to psychiatric service dog handlers. All handlers can end up in the hospital. Everyone can end up in the hospital. But if we're thinking about long-term hospitalizations or potentially forced hospitalizations for things, it is the handler's responsibility to care for their dog. Hospitals are not required to take care of that dog. So the dog may or may not be admitted to the hospital with their handler due to that lack of ability to take them for bathroom breaks, feed them, things like that, depending on what they're in the hospital for treatment. So hospitals, again, not required to care for your service dog. If you don't have a strong support network where someone can care for the dog while the patient is in the hospital, something to consider before recommending or placing a psychiatric service dog. The same thing goes with if we have patients who are struggling with their ADLs, they may also struggle to care for their dog. So I know that can quickly change on how well a patient is doing with those things. So it's just something to consider. Not every dog needs tons and tons of maintenance, but they all do need basic care of food, water, and exercise. So if we're struggling with our own ADLs, we need to make sure that the dog can be cared for as well. Dogs are also somewhat expensive. Unlike a more traditional piece of medical equipment, a walker, a wheelchair, or crutches, they come with recurring costs. So dogs do get sick from time to time. They have medical bills just like humans do. So if we have patients who are struggling with continuous employment and or struggling to make ends meet already, it's worth considering whether or not adding the financial burdens of a dog is the right fit.
Something we left off this list that I was just thinking of is the idea that sometimes we also consider that a psychiatric service dog or even an emotional support animal may benefit the person, and then they get the dog and it makes things worse. We actually see this with owners of pets who, what I'm thinking of most frequently is an older couple may come in and say, our kids got us this puppy thinking, you know, we needed something to keep us busy. And they hate the puppy. The puppy's making their life miserable. And so their mental health is actually decreasing. It's not making them happier. It's a stressor. So that's also something to consider that I just thought of that we left off of that list.
Yeah, very similarly, patients with anxiety frequently describe wanting that comfort of having a dog around. And for many, having a dog gives them something to focus on and helps with that. For many other patients, the constant questions and having to advocate for themselves and their dogs can be much more detrimental than helpful.
Okay, we did it. We kept it under an hour. I think we did great.
Yeah.
We wanted to open it up and have plenty of time for anybody in the audience who has questions to ask. I don't know if any were dropped in the chat while we were talking, or if you guys want to let people unmute, whatever you prefer.
If you have questions for Tori or Justine, unmute yourself or type them in the chat.
We were so thorough. Nobody has any questions.
That's what I was just going to say. You all did such an awesome job that you covered everybody's questions that anybody could ever have.
Well, we have our contact information there. If anybody thinks of any questions, or if you ask Taylor or Rob if they have want to send over multiple questions at once, that's fine. We'd be happy to respond in an email, or you can find us on social media as well to get a hold of us. I know that you obviously can't talk specifics about patients, but if you're considering recommending an ESA or even a psychiatric service dog, and you're unsure of whether or not there are tasks that a dog could do that would help that person, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, and we'd be willing to have that discussion with you to help you see if that is a good fit for someone.
Well, that's great. Tori, Justine, thank you so much. The very informative topic, and really appreciate your time here today. And for everybody that was on the Lunch and Learn today, thanks for attending. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.